Going into the final saga in One Piece, there are few factors that are as important to current and future developments as Haki. I mean, Kaido says it so explicitly to us, right? Yet you'd be hard-pressed to find a more controversial concept in the series, even amongst the most ardent fans. Opinions on Haki as a power system are rarely flattering. Claims that Haki is a dumb power system, that it's too simplistic, that it renders everything else useless, that it makes fights boring, and that it's filled with inconsistencies and retcons, or that it is a retcon in itself. Claims that Haki has ruined One Piece, that Oda should have stuck to devil fruits or built upon Rokushiki or whatever. It's near impossible to enter any kind of discussion on Haki without running. In fact, I would say it's way more difficult to find people that have an overall positive outlook on Haki. And to be frank, for the longest time, I myself was largely neutral on this. But as part of my mega theory on One Piece powers, in a move that was unfortunate to my sanity, I decided to do a deep dive on Haki and to reveal all the mysteries that I possibly could about it. And what I found was way beyond my wildest expectations, that Haki as a power and as a concept was deeply grounded in an extremely extensive philosophical tradition, that in itself it represents and embodies major themes of the story, that it is deeply connected to the history of the One Piece world and its politics, that its nature tells us about the nature of the universe of One Piece itself, that it is way more complex than basically anyone gives it credit for, that it can explain pretty much every special ability that is in a devil fruit or technology, and that despite the common perception that Haki was just tackled on halfway through the story, you actually cannot understand One Piece without understanding Haki. So how about we start with a little tale of how this theory came about. Okay, I'm finally finished with the Kitetsu theory. Now all I have to do for the next video is talk about the breath of all things, make the connection between ki and breath, use this to explain all the elemental powers and dials, then I just have to talk about the voice of all things, how the breath of all things can explain Conqueror's pressure, and why Conqueror's can be used as a coding similarly to Armament Haki. But I guess if I'm gonna talk about Conqueror's coding and pressure, I'll have to explain Conqueror's Haki in general, right? If I have to talk about coding, I guess I have to talk about Armament Haki too. And at that point, why would I leave out observation? I guess I'll have to do the whole deep dive on Haki. But that theory wasn't really done. Well, I guess I have to do that research now. It's all based on this thing called Qigong, right? I mean, how complicated can this really be? Well, goddammit. Huh? Odin? Wait, that's not your hair, that's a hat. Who the hell are you, fraud?
Oh, I'm so glad you asked. I am called by many names. I am the world. I am the universe. I'm God. I am truth. I am all. I am one. And I am also you.
You're me? Man, what is it with you Odin wannabes and claiming to literally be someone else? Look, in the real world, we call this identity theft.
You have dared to knock on the door. Now, the door is open.
Wait, please, I can't spend months reading about ancient Chinese philosophy for you to bother the moon negative me.
Quiet, child. Is this what you wanted, isn't it?
Bro, how am I supposed to get to my theory on Lucha's pigeon?
I will show you.
I'm not even a kid, man, I'm just short. Yeah, Chi is the vital force that animates living beings. It means breath, it's also the essence to everything. Wait, 5 phases? Wuji? The hell does empty yet inexhaustible mean? What the hell is internal alchemy? What the hell is Jing? Why are so many emperors dying from elixir poisoning? Wait, why is that guy pregnant with a flaming baby? As my mind is flooded with thousands of years of complex and profound philosophy mixed with some of the weirdest superstition created by mankind, my confusion only grows. But finally, as I'm about to lose the last shreds of my sanity, everything becomes clear, and I can finally see the truth.
That's alright, because if you honestly express yourself, it doesn't matter, see?
After months, I finally emerged from the gates of truth as a changed rat. I had reached awakening, but at what cost? I could never look at Odin, Kaido, Lao-Ji, or Miss Golden Week the same way ever again. So if you're willing to go through probably the longest, most thorough theory on a power system you'll ever see, I'll show you not only the in-depth explanations of armament, observation, and conquerors, but also how all those unexplained elemental powers like Fishman Karate, Electro, and Flame Conjuring are all manifestations of the breath of all things, and how the use of the breath of all things is yet another shade of Haki. No, not a different use of armament or observation or whatever, but a completely separate shade of its own. I'll show you what it is to hear the voice of all things, what makes one able to hear the voice of all things, and how it allows one to read the poneglyphs, but also Diabo Jambe, Ashura, Rokushiki, Seimei Kikan, Lao-Ji's Qigong, the secret to Kureha's youth, Chopper's path to becoming a doctor who can cure anything, Miss Golden Week's collar trap, stuff that you likely thought didn't even need an explanation. Like, how the hell is Zoro suddenly able to use long-range attacks in Skypiea? What the hell are gorillas, and what did he do to Ryūma's corpse to make it catch on fire? The very origins of Haki as a power, how it relates to the individual's body, their physical stamina, their mind, how it is deeply connected to the very politics of the world of One Piece, and how it can explain even seemingly minor things, like why Kuma sent Luffy to Amazon Lily of all places, but also what Haki can tell us about the very inner workings, the metaphysics of the world of One Piece, and through it explain even things like dials or the Vivre Cards. We'll understand how it all stems from some very ancient Chinese philosophy and from the deep ways it influenced East Asian culture through the millennia. We were first introduced to the concept of the breath of all things in Alabasta during Zoro's fight with Mr. One. Now, there are very important things to notice in this scene. Firstly, all things have a breath, almost as if they were living things. Different things have different breaths. Noticing this allows one to sense the presence of different things. Zoro was able to sense the breath of non-living things when he was close to death. This knowledge of the breath of all things is known among certain swordsmen and is what allows them to cut iron. Specifically, Zoro's master from Shimotsuki village, Goshiro, and that using this power of breath to cut specific things involves conveying that will to the sword, and by conveying that will to cut that particular thing, they become easily able to cut same material and unable to cut anything else. Now keep this in the back of your mind. I will explain all of these things in due time. But the breath of all things is not only about cutting iron or stone. Hundreds of chapters later, we are introduced to Kinemon's Foxfire style. Through it, Kinemon is able to cut fire. Zoro was able to copy this technique from Kinemon and cut fire himself, implying that this is also a use of the breath of all things. But here there is a very important and very telling detail. Though we only see Zoro cutting already existing fire, that is not the case for Kinemon. Kinemon is able to create flames with his sword slashes, essentially conjuring flames. Yes, I'm implying that various powers of elemental control that we see throughout One Piece are similar to swordsmen splitting fire or iron. They are uses of the breath of all things. So let's try to understand what the breath of all things even is. So in the first video, I introduced to you the idea of Ki, an ancient East Asian concept of a vital energy that flows through a person's body, animating them, and that can be also seen as synonymous with their spirit or their will. And that Haki is directly based on this, much like the Ki power system in One Piece's predecessor, Dragon Ball. But this is a very simplified explanation. Ki in itself, Qi in the original Chinese, is a much broader concept. For example, the practice of Feng Shui is based on maintaining a harmonious flow of the universal Qi that flows through the whole environment. Qi was not something that was thought about as merely being present in humans or even living beings in general. Qi was often seen as something that permeated everything and that linked people to their surroundings. To properly understand Qi, we have to look at its original meaning, which is breath, vapor or air. The idea of this vital energy flowing through a person's body is largely born out of the perception that we breathe in air that then flows through our bodies and revitalizes us. At the same time, just like the air flows inside a person's body, it flows through the atmosphere, forming wind and clouds, thus forming this connection between an individual and the environment. And now maybe you're thinking, breath. Does that have something to do with Zoro's perception that everything has a breath? Of course it does, but before we get to that, let's try to understand a little where this idea of manipulating Ki as a power system comes from. Because it sure wasn't One Piece and it wasn't Dragon Ball either that invented this idea. Directly following the conceptualization of Qi as a vital energy that animates living beings was the development of Qigong, literally meaning Qi cultivation, for use in spirituality, health, and martial arts. The earliest recorded detailed textual description of Qigong practices is the Neye, literally meaning internal training, one of the oldest mystical texts in China, probably dating back at least 300 years before Christ, though some mentions of breath circulation and such seem to date even farther back, and a lot of Qigong practices seem to have derived from even earlier shamanic practices that seem to go back at least around 7,000 years into the past. Qigong mainly involves meditation due to the spiritual view of Qi, breathing exercises, only to the meaning of Qi as breath or air, and various forms of body movements. For use in martial arts, Qigong promised to greatly increase one's power and stamina, and even to use their Qi almost like an invisible armor to reinforce and protect their body, with techniques like Iron Shirt, Iron Finger, and Iron Palm. Oh, and yeah, the torso and the palm are not all that they were protecting with Qi. Is that a brick? Yeah guys, Armament Haki is pretty much taken straight out of Qigong. Oh yeah, Iron Shirt is also probably where Tekai, Iron Body, gets its name from. Much like Shigun, Finger Gun, is very similar to Iron Finger, no?
So you focus all your chi to that area,
Yes.
and then you squeeze and you hold it there?
Yes, to my finger and go this point.
Not looking too good for the people who think Rokushiki has nothing to do with Haki. The supposedly superhuman feats achievable with Qigong would become the source of many legends and fantasy, where these powers could become insanely exaggerated. This is especially the case for Wuxia. Wuxia is a genre of fantasy literature about martial artists in ancient China. If Dragon Ball is the father of battle shonen, Wuxia is like the great-grandfather or great-great-great-grandfather. I don't know, dog, you think I'm counting the generations? Anyways, the term Wuxia for the genre was only coined in the Qing dynasty, but its roots are over 2,000 years old. Legends of wandering heroes or vigilantes that would travel around the country enacting justice with their own martial prowess, the Yoxia, date back to at least 200 to 300 years before Christ during the Zhou dynasty. These resemble knight-errant types, wandering heroes or wandering vigilantes, individual warriors that would wander around the country using their martial prowess to solve local problems and enact justice, not necessarily in accordance with the law, but rather with their own moral code. For that, they weren't seen as the most respectful towards authority and could even be seen as criminals. Legalist Han Fei dubbed the Yoxia as one of the 5 vermin. Our heroes in One Piece being a band of criminals might seem foreign to us, but historically it's been rather common in Wuxia novels. The protagonist in Water Margin, one of the most important novels of Wuxia fiction and just one of the most important novels in Chinese literature, were straight up a group of bandits. Throughout its long history, the Wuxia genre threaded a peculiar path of being in some ways the epitome of traditional Chinese culture, and in others its complete opposite. Through their righteousness and enactment of justice, its heroes, the Shiaki, were an example of the Junzi, the superior, righteous person of Confucian morality. And in this genre, as fighting power was obtained through the cultivation of their martial arts and the practice of Qigong, which were in principle available to everyone, is in line with Confucian values of meritocracy. On the other hand, the Shiake were largely non-conformist and disruptive, which is a problem for Confucians that value social harmony. Their wandering nature went against the traditional Confucian family system, as it meant they wouldn't settle down and form roots, and their use of martial prowess to enact justice according to their own moral sense meant going against the law and thus against established authorities. In fact, it is precisely the fact that their powers are achieved through training and personal growth that gives them a lot, if not most, of their socially disruptive potential. For example, going back to some of the early Wuxia stories of the Tang Dynasty that arguably served as prototypes for modern Wuxia stories, among the most famous are the Kunlun slave and Yin Yang. Kunlun was a word used to denote people with dark skin. Originally denoted Chinese people with darker skin, by the time of the Tang Dynasty, when the Kunlun slave was written, this was mostly used to denote dark-skinned people from Southeast Asia, like Sumatra, Bali and Java, and even East Africans who were brought to China by Arabian slave traders. Even in ancient China, white skin was seen as a desirable trait. So it's no wonder that descriptions of this Kunlun people were often pretty negative. So not only was the protagonist of this story a slave, but he was from a people who suffered racial discrimination. Regardless, throughout the story, he is depicted as being better than his master physically, intellectually, emotionally. He performs superhuman feats with his martial arts skills, escapes authorities, and by the end is a free man and heavily implied to have either reached or being close to reach Taoist-style immortality. And right now I'm sure some people are seeing some similarities with certain lore drops that we have been getting since Onigashima. And though women were largely seen as inferior and expected to be in submissive roles towards men in ancient China, Yin Yang, the protagonist of the story by the same name, was a woman trained since childhood in Kung Fu to become an assassin. Her martial arts skills are so great that they leave her father petrified in fear. It doesn't matter if the ancient masters of the Tao were all Chinese males. Qi is something that exists in every living person, as it is the very energy of life. And so, through internal training and Kung Fu, power is available to everyone, be they master or slave, Chinese or foreign, light or dark-skinned, man or woman. But the birth of the modern wuxia genre happens in the early 20th century, following the new culture movement, which sought to move away from the traditional Chinese Confucian system that was seen by critics as highly authoritarian, hierarchical, patriarchal and anti-democratic, in favor of a more free and egalitarian system. Because of this, in the context of the new cultural movement, the Xia were seen as a symbol of personal freedom, defiance of authority, and a break from the traditional Confucian and Chinese family system. This is when the tropes associated with the genre become truly solidified, even if most of them were already present to varying extents in the novels of centuries past. Other than the wandering chivalrous, not very law-abiding heroes, the focus on codes of honor, the importance of keeping promises and being true to your word, and the frequent themes of revenge, there is the very important trope of the world of martial arts, where fighters train different martial arts and cultivate their powers, seek to become stronger or even the strongest, and frequently compete against each other, that exists parallel to regular civilian society. Unlike, say, the wizarding world of Harry Potter, this is not some secret society of people gifted with special magical powers. It is not hidden. Pretty much everyone knows that it exists, and pretty much everyone can enter it, provided that they are willing to put in the effort and take on the associated life-threatening risks, reasons for which most of people prefer to just not. But if you do choose to enter this world and train in Kung Fu, you can gain all kinds of superhuman magic-like abilities. That's because the other staple in the genre is the highly exaggerated take on Qi. Because of its highly exaggerated and fantastical take on Qigong, heroes and villains alike in these stories were able to perform all kinds of magical nonsense, like being able to use things like fans or musical instruments as deadly weapons, killing an enemy with a single blow, or emitting energy beams or lightning from their hands. it doesn't take much to see how this served as the basis to pretty much every single battle shonen out there, right? In Dragon Ball, there is the world of martial arts, and if you enter it, you can learn about Ki. In Naruto, there is the Shinobi world, and if you enter it, you can learn chakra, which is also a life force energy, and even has a whole meridian system taken straight out of traditional Chinese medicine. Hunter x Hunter has the Hunter Association, and if you enter it, you can learn Nen, which is also based on your life energy and also flows through a meridian system. Demon Slayer chooses to go back to that original meaning of Chi as breath, and so if you enter the Demon Slayer corpse, you get to learn about the different breathing styles. And in One Piece, there is the world of pirates and marines. And if you enter it, provided you last long enough, you can learn about Haki. So when people wonder why Haki was introduced in One Piece, or claim that it was simply to counter Logia's intangibility, well, for one, a chi-based power system like Haki is simply the expected thing in the literary tradition that One Piece stems from. And what Haki accomplishes, other than its importance to the themes of the story, which will be discussed further, is what chi-based power systems are there to accomplish in similar stories. It introduces a degree of meritocracy to the power system. It makes it so that through training, personal growth, and facing challenges, people can grow from the lowest levels of the power hierarchy all the way to the top. It's there so that guys like, for example, Zoro, who don't have a devil fruit, are not from a race with special powers, or have some special technology, can still do some cool magical shit instead of just being a dude with swords. Take for comparison My Hero Academia, that while being a battle shonen, is more so inspired by Western superhero stories, and even though it does democratize the access to power more than the typical Western superhero story, where the only guys with superpowers are the few heroes or villains who got bit by a radioactive badger or something, by having a system of quirks where nearly everybody has their own special power, still you are limited to whatever power you were born with. And while some of them are incredibly powerful, others just plain suck. Or look at Black Clover, largely inspired by Western fantasy stories. Its main power system is mana. An individual's affinity to mana, and thus their potential to use magic, is something that they are just born with. Some being born with way more than others, and a rare few simply being born with none. But then, at some point in the story, in order to create new avenues for growth for its magicless protagonist, it introduces Ki through the Japanese coded character as a power that everyone can learn. Like, you don't have to bring Logias into this. As I'll prove to you, what Zoro uses to cut Mr. One is Haki. So while with Haki, we have Zoro go through an epiphany about the nature of the world around him during a near-death experience, remembering the teachings of his master of what it means to be a true swordsman, and then taking one of the most important and most iconic steps in his journey to becoming the world's greatest swordsman. Without it, we have Zoro simply unable to harm Mr. One, his journey thus ending right then at the beginning of the Grand Line, or him having to rely on some non-swordsmanship trick to defeat Mr. One, like throwing him into the sea or into a crucible to melt his iron or whatever. I legitimately fail to see how the second alternative is better for the story. But One Piece's Haki, even amongst other similar power systems based on Chi, goes way deeper into the philosophical and spiritual roots of this concept. More than just a standard vitalist theory, the concept of Qi was immensely important in ancient Chinese metaphysics and cosmogony, that is, the nature and origin of the universe. Through the writings of mainly Taoist and Confucian philosophers, Qi would become similar to our word energy, something that exists in all things and even that all things are made of, and that determines the flow and changes of all things. To many, such as Zhangzai, Qi included matter and also the forces that act on matter, and that different forms of Qi, mainly at different densities, will result in the different substances. A living being's spirit was only the least dense, most ethereal type of Qi. Denser Qi would form liquids and the densest Qi would form solids. The breadth of all things in One Piece is pretty directly based on this. To say that all things possess a breadth is essentially saying that all things possess ki. You could see the breadth of all things as the ki of all things, or that the spirit or ki of a person is the breadth of that individual. All things have a breadth, a ki. Normally people aren't able to sense the ki of non-living things. Zoro was able to when he was, as he puts it, between life and death. Why is this the case? Well, because at that point, between life and death, his ki, his spirit, was closer to that of non-living things, thus more attuned to and more perceptive of them. So, to understand this a little bit better, let's take a closer look not only at this ancient philosophy itself, but also on its history and surrounding mythology, so we can appreciate the frankly ridiculous amount of referencing and hinting that Oda does towards it. What we commonly refer to as ancient Chinese philosophy has its origins in the 100 schools of thought period during the Zhou dynasty from the 6th century BC to 221 BC. That's when Confucianism, Taoism, legalism, Mohism, and the school of Yin and Yang, also known as the school of naturalists, were first developed. Confucianism and Taoism were largely in agreement when it came to metaphysics and cosmogony, but in a lot of ways are total opposites when it comes to ethics, politics, and what is considered, so to say, the right way to live. Confucianism advocated for the attainment of virtue and for the adherence to social norms, traditions, and rituals, and socially assigned roles and hierarchy. Let the ruler be a ruler and the subject be a subject. It became a foundation for traditional society and, combined with the school of law, formed the ideological basis for the imperial government. Until the late 19th century, Taoism, by contrast, preached a certain harmony with nature and advocated by rule through inaction, without use of coercion or excessive interference into people's lives, to the point that some, somewhat anachronistically, consider the original Taoists as some of the earliest anarchists. Also appear in Confucianism, but particularly important to Taoism, is the concept of Wu Wei, literally meaning non-action, but perhaps better translated as action through inaction or effortless action. Like, for example, when in the Tao Te Ching, Lao Tzu states that the Tao does not do anything, yet nothing is left undone. This is the ideal behavior, the ideal state to strive towards. A state of free-flow spontaneity where one does not have to force themselves to act. To Confucians, one could understand and embody Wu Wei by knowing their proper place in the cosmos. For Confucius especially, Wu Wei was a quality of the ideal ruler. The ruler embodying Wu Wei would not have to do anything directly. Merely by embodying virtue himself and standing his position in the appropriate way, his subjects would follow suit and order themselves, and the land reaches harmony. For Taoists, reaching Wu Wei was a matter of returning to naturalness, becoming like an uncarved log, and returning to the natural simplicity. And so here, even more, the ideal leader is not one who loads the people with orders and prohibitions, but one who leaves them alone and lets them return to their natural simplicity. The school of Yin and Yang, whose founder is considered to be Zhou Yan, was principally concerned with metaphysics, with explaining the universe, and it did so by developing on the concepts of wuxing, the 5 phases or 5 elements, qi, and yin and yang, opposite and complementary principles seen throughout the whole universe. Yin as the receptive principle, associated with darkness, passivity, negative, the moon, and dense physical matter, and Yang as the active principle, associated with light, activity, positive, the sun, and spiritual ethereal matter. The school of Yin and Yang was largely absorbed into Taoism, largely giving origin to Chinese alchemy and traditional medicine, but the concepts of Yin and Yang, the 5 phases, Qi, predate Zhou Yan and are already seen in the earliest Taoist texts. It's really difficult to say when the system of 5 phases emerged, but we can already see this broad classification of things in groups of 5 in the Tao Te Ching, by the mention of the 5 colors, the 5 sounds, and the 5 tastes. The earliest recorded usage of the concept of Yin and Yang, though, comes from the so-called Book of Changes, the I Ching. The Book of Changes started as a simple divination manual known by the name Zhou-Yi, the Changes of Zhou, that got expanded upon the following centuries of the Warring States period by the addition of various texts, mainly of Confucian origin. The original text, Zhou-Yi, is theorized to be from around the 10th or 9th century before Christ. Zhou, as in the Zhou dynasty, at the time Western Zhou dynasty, and its authorship is traditionally attributed to the Duke of Zhou. Now, I'm sure some of you already noticed this by now, but the Zhou dynasty, the Duke of Zhou, the Changes of Zhou, Sun and Moon, Zhou Yan. Yeah, kinda interesting that the rulers of Zhou are called dukes, that they divided themselves in a cycle of day and night, of sun and moon, yin and yang, and that through the Sulan transformation, the Minks themselves have yin and yang sides. Anyway, the Book of Changes is centered around the hexagrams, each comprised of 6 lines, a dashed one representing yin and a full one representing yang. 3 lines together have 8 possible combinations, known as the 8 trigrams, the Bagua. Each of them having an individual meaning and image. The 8 trigrams combine to form 64 possible hexagrams. This is considered to be one of the earliest recorded uses of binary numbers, and in fact, in the 17th century, it would influence the polymath Leibniz into working on a system of binary numbers and logic, for which he is often seen as the father of computer science. Here we already see the binary of yin and yang, and the idea that by simple permutations of this binary, we can achieve the complexity and diversity that we see in the natural world. But, according to many Chinese Taoists, the origins of Taoism go much farther back. Many of them see the founder of Taoism as being the Yellow Emperor, in Chinese, Huangdi. Originally attested as a god, the Yellow Emperor would become reinterpreted as a historical figure, mainly for political reasons. He is part of what are called the 3 sovereigns and 5 emperors, legendary figures seen in ancient China as the rulers preceding the Xia dynasty and as basically the creators of Chinese civilization. The Yellow Emperor was traditionally credited with the creation of traditional Chinese medicine, of the concepts of yin and yang, the 5 phases, the earliest form of writing, and many other things. Now, to address the obvious, yes, this guy is just Odin. His iconic hat was reinterpreted as Odin's ridiculous hairstyle. We see yin and yang in Odin's 2-sword style, wielding in one hand Ameno Habakiri, the sword that can slice the heavens, and on the other, Enma, the ruler of the underworld, a sword that can slice through hell. Likewise, Odin's Kozuki clan are the creators of the poneglyphs and the ones who have preserved through the centuries its ancient writing style. The earliest known Chinese script is Oracle Bone Script, named as such because we mainly know about it by inscriptions that were made on bones or turtle shells during the Shang dynasty that were then tossed into the fire to observe how they would crack as a form of divination. Though it's interesting that the poneglyphs specifically contain all of these prophecies as if carrying messages obtained through divination. Still, during the Shang dynasty, it evolved into Bronze script and then into Seal script during the Zhou dynasty. Do I need to say what these resemble? Seal script specifically was named as such due to its use in, well, seals, almost exclusively square in shape and used to stamp documents with red ink. The most famous of this being the Heirloom Seal of the Realm, which was seen as a physical symbol of the mandate of heaven that granted the emperor authority and is now a legendary lost treasure of China. Again, do I need to say what this resembles? The legend of the Yellow Emperor was so influential to Chinese culture, the Yellow Emperor would eventually become seen as the original ancestor to all Chinese people. In fact, the title for the Chinese emperor that was created in 221 BCE and would continue in use until the fall of the Qing dynasty in 1912 combined the word for the 3 sovereigns or Augusts with the title for the 5 emperors or divine rulers to form Huangdi, also associating the emperor to the mythical figure of the Yellow Emperor. Yellow became the color specifically associated with the Chinese emperor, and the dragon robes, the formal clothes representing the authority of the emperor, were traditionally made yellow. The color Huang in Chinese has historically been quite a bit more ample than our own Western definition of yellow, including shades of brown and even orange. So Odin's orange clothing? Yeah, not that far off actually. And also it's more in line with the traditional robes of the Japanese emperor that were of course inspired by the dragon robes of the Chinese emperor. The Yellow Emperor's legendary enemy was Qi-Yo. He doesn't look very scary in this tomb relief, but he is described as being unbelievably strong, a bold and brave leader, having the head of a horned bull with a metal forehead, and even exercising some control over the weather, like creating storms and thick fog to obscure the sun. Qi-Yo would sometimes be venerated as the god of war and is sometimes seen as the mythological ancestor of the Miao people. So yeah, this guy is just Kaido. You know, absurdly strong beast-like man with bull horns, a bold and brave leader who creates storms blocking the sky, a god of war. In fact, contrasting with the civilizatory character of the Yellow Emperor, Qi-Yo, especially in more modern depictions, is often portrayed with a certain barbaric aura around him, with a rough and kempt hair and beard, clad in animal pelts, and leading hordes of equally barbaric beast-like people or even demons. You know, the beast pirates. In fact, according to legend, the Yandi, or Flame Emperor, was unable to defeat Qi-Yo by himself, and it was the Yellow Emperor and the Flame Emperor together who took down Qi-Yo. It would be really interesting if Kaido also had a certain Flame Emperor who was out to get him. Someone with a move literally named Flame Emperor, with a brother who took on his devil fruit who now gets named the Flame Emperor. And also it would be really interesting if the people carrying on the wills of these Yellow and Flame Emperors formed an alliance to take down Kaido. So Taoism originally did not emerge so much as a religion, but one more of those various schools of thought, even though the lines between philosophy and religion were blurry back then. But even as more organized, esoteric or ritualistic, more traditionally religious aspects of Taoism began to emerge, even with as influential as texts like the Tao Te Ching, the Zhuangzi, etc. were. It's not like there was a central sacred text, nor one unified centralized organization to keep people from distorting the dogma or whatever. So all of this school of thought influenced and mixed with each other, and this continues through the centuries as more stuff keeps getting thrown into the mix. When Buddhism arrives in China, around the 3rd century before Christ, it gets largely interpreted through the lens of Taoism, and even confused with it to some extent. Buddha gets simply seen as a foreigner who achieved Taoist-style immortality, a Xian. Buddha nature gets associated with the Taoist concepts of emptiness and naturalness, and the first converts to Buddhism were mainly Taoists themselves, who really only added Buddhist teachings mainly from the Mahayana school to their existing Taoist framework. This interaction between Buddhism and Taoism gives birth to Chan Buddhism, which becomes the dominant school of Buddhism in China, and later also the dominant school in Japan, where it becomes known by a name that is more recognizable by Westerners, Zen Buddhism. So as we move forward with the theory, well, the fundamental basis of it is almost entirely Taoist in nature. Do note that there are all these other influences mixed with it. So the thing about everything having a breath is not just a statement meaningful to Haki. It tells us something about the fundamental nature of the world of One Piece, about its very metaphysics. Okay, so if breath is ki and all things have a breath, a ki, shouldn't Kitetsu, the material that interacts with ki by storing or channeling it, also interact with the breath of all things? Shouldn't it be able also to store or channel the breath of different things? Why does it not seem able to do that on its own, the same way that it's able to readily absorb Inu's Haki that is stored in the water? Of course, this will be addressed further in this video. For now, I guess you'll just have to take it for granted that Kitetsu, or at least unworked Kitetsu, will not naturally absorb the breath of all things the same way that it naturally absorbs Haki. And this, as we'll see, is a pretty crucial difference that is extremely telling about the nature of Haki. But just like Shimotsuki Kozaburo was able to work to smith Kitetsu in a particular way such that it is able to channel a user's Haki, even drawing out more Haki than the user is consciously outputting, Kitetsu might be able to be worked by another brilliant blacksmith to channel the breath of non-living things. Or perhaps some living creature that lives in an environment that is filled with Kitetsu, where it absorbs Kitetsu from, might evolve to use that Kitetsu in its body to interact with the breath of different things. For example, some type of shellfish living, say, in the sea clouds in Skypiea that, as explained in the previous video, are made of Kitetsu particles bound together with Imu's Haki. Just by living in that environment, probably has its body filled with Kitetsu and could evolve to, say, store and release the breath of different things. The breath of air, of fire, of heat, of light, of impact, of slashes, of water, of sound, of the clouds themselves. Yeah guys, dials. Dials are the shells of shellfish that absorb Kitetsu from living in the sea clouds and evolve to use the Kitetsu on their bodies to be able to store and release the breath or ki of different things. And notice this, dials are formally introduced to us in that very same chapter where Pagaya talks about how the clouds of Skypiea are made from pyrobloin. And what is the first dial that is introduced to us? Well, it's none other than the breath dial. So, when it comes to the metaphysics of the world of One Piece, the best way that I can put it is that it is essentially Taoism mixed with some Zen Buddhism, but looked through the lens of modern science. Taoism has a very well-developed metaphysics of its own that is at the center of the concept of Qi and Qigong, so naturally when developing a power system based on Qigong, you would want the metaphysics of your fictional world to be aligned with it. Buddhism is very important to the philosophy of One Piece, but it has nowhere near the focus on metaphysics as Taoism. In fact, there is a whole parable involving the Buddha about how it can be unproductive to dwell too deep on the nature of the world instead of seeking liberation. Even when the concepts are taken from this ancient philosophy, notice how frequently they are explained to us by scientists and or using scientific wording. So some concepts are interpreted and updated in ways that jive better with modern scientific knowledge. In the most influential text of Taoism, the Tao Te Ching, written around 400 BC, allegedly by Lao Tzu, a legendary figure simply known as Old Master, we can see a short description of the creation of the universe using the concepts of Yin and Yang and Qi. Do make note here that it's already difficult to translate modern Chinese to English, and the classic Chinese that was used for these texts specifically allows for a great deal of interpretation, so translations here can vary pretty widely. I've myself checked multiple translations and I will try my best here to convey their meaning. The Tao creates one, one creates two, two creates three, and three creates 10,000 things. All things carry yin and embrace yang. Breath is infused to achieve harmony. 10,000 is used here to mean a ridiculously large number, essentially infinite. The Tao Te Ching refers to the Tao, literally meaning the way, which is the one original principle of the universe, the natural order of existence, as empty yet inexhaustible, older than the gods, indescribable in its complexity, and creator of all things, good or evil. What is described here is essentially a creation out of nothing, and it's a concept that becomes a bit clearer as later thinkers expand upon the concept of Wuji, already mentioned in vaguer terms in these original Taoist texts, like the Tao Te Ching itself and also the Zhuangzi and Liezi. Wuji can mean without limit, but likely more appropriately means without pole. It refers essentially to a state of undifferentiation, the way that the Taoists interpreted the void or non-existence is not quite the same as the way you probably used to think about it. Rather than an emptiness without any potential to become or create anything, this void, this nothingness that is said to permeate everything and be the origin of everything, is rather a state of quiescence and undifferentiation. It holds infinite potential to give rise to anything, but precisely because it is limitless, boundless, formless, infinite, it is also nothing in particular. You can try to think of it like a completely still surface of water or a blank canvas. The moment something spontaneously arises from the stillness, the one, there is being and not being. There is differentiation. One gives birth to two. Remember the binary. If you have only zeros, as in nothingness, or if you have only ones, really it's all the same. They're two sides of the same coin, we just change a symbol for another. Something can only exist, information can only exist, if there is differentiation. As the Tao Te Ching puts it, if beauty can be called beauty, ugliness must exist. If good can be called good, evil must exist. Therefore, what is and what is not create each other. Difficult and easy complement each other. Tall and short shape each other. High and low rest on each other. Voice and tone blend with each other. First and last follow each other. And now that there is differentiation, yin and yang, movement, energy, breath comes into being in order to create harmony. The moment the pond is no longer perfectly still, that there is high and low, waves will travel through the water surface. Heat flows from high temperature to low temperature. Wind flows because there are zones of high pressure and zones of low pressure. Water flows in a stream because there is high elevation and low elevation. And being more general, things are moved by forces from one point to the other because there is high and low potential. 2 creates 3. And Qi, moved by harmonizing yin and yang, creates everything. 3 creates the 10,000 things. So, considering how deep Oda seemed to go on his research on the Taoist tradition, and considering breath, Qi, was made such a fundamental thing to the world of One Piece, it's not crazy to imagine that the Tao is also a thing in the world of One Piece. That is the fundamental principle of creation that creates and coordinates all material reality, that permeates everything and that can be seen as synonymous with the void itself. It's also likely that it would be a thing because similar concepts are present in many different East Asian traditions. The Confucians would speak of Tian, which is frequently translated as heaven. Buddhism and also Hinduism have Akasha, which is void, space, but also means the sky, as in the empty, boundless space that exists in the heavens. A fifth element, which is also all-pervading and the first element to appear and which creates all the others. In Japanese Buddhism, this is known as Ku, especially when used to mean void, or Sora when referring to the sky. The void here is also the creator of all the other elements and thus the creator of all material reality and thus the creator of all phenomena. We can also talk about the related yet probably more fundamental concept in Hinduism of Brahman, the ultimate reality that permeates everything, that creates everything, and that everything is ultimately a part of. And even in Japan's indigenous religion, Shinto, centered around the worship of the kami, there is the concept of musubi. Originally, musuhi, it carries the meaning of arising spontaneously or becoming, and so it is associated with the creation of all things and in their development as they complete their natural cycles. But for example, Kami Musuhi no Kami is a major kami of creation, but as the alternative name Musubi became increasingly common, with it came the meaning of Musubi of knot, of tying together. Which is why if you search for musubi, you're probably just gonna find a lot of results for dishes like this, you know, because it's tied together with seaweed. But basically, as a concept, it roughly refers to this natural principle of creation and development that creates everything, permeates everything, and ties everything together. While it might seem that I'm wasting our time here with some useless metaphysics, just keep in mind this concept of the Tao emptiness or the void, which can at times also be referred to as the sky, heaven, Brahman, Musubi, etc. The fundamental principle that creates material reality, that permeates everything and ties everything together. It's gonna be really important to understand some stuff further on. So, if breath and ki are the same thing, should a person through haki potentially be able to interact with the breath of all things? Now here's something funny. This usage of the breath of all things, at least in the context of cutting iron, was already confirmed to be haki, as in literally confirmed. Well, unless Hyōgoro doesn't have any idea what the hell he's talking about. See, when Hyōgoro is talking to Luffy about how in Wano haki is referred to as Ryūō, meaning cherry blossom flow, Hyōgoro says explicitly that this is the same power that swordsmen imbue into swords to be able to cut iron. And it's not like this should be a shocker. When Zoro first uses the breath of all things, he explicitly says that he is imbuing that sword with that will. What is that, if not haki? But what kind of haki? Is it armament? Is it conquerors? Is it observation? No, of course it isn't observation, but neither is it armament or conquerors. Rather, it is a fourth type of haki, and I'm gonna show you why. So, an extremely pervasive headcanon throughout the fanbase that has been repeated so many times that it has been basically accepted as fact, to the point that it is in the One Piece wiki itself as if it is officially confirmed, canonical information, is that Ryūō specifically means armament haki. That is just false. The only things that are ever stated about Ryūō are that it is the Wano name for haki, not for armament specifically, that it carries the meaning of flow, and that it is what swordsmen imbue on their weapon to be able to cut steel. Hyōgoro never says anything about armament haki. This confusion is likely born out of people making an equivalency with mantra, which specifically meant observation haki. The thing is, mantra meaning only observation haki not only is directly confirmed by Rayleigh, but it makes sense because Enel's gang in Skypiea only knew about observation haki. They did not know about armament or conquerors or whatever else. This is not the case for the samurai of Wano. All of the scabbards are confirmed to be users of both armament and observation, and Oden was a user of conqueror's haki. So if Ryūō only means armament haki specifically, what the hell do they call these other forms of haki? This idea that Ryūō means specifically armament is why so many people in the fanbase think that Luffy's training with Hyōgoro is made useless and obsolete once he learns Conqueror's coding. Yet what Hyōgoro taught Luffy is about the flow of haki itself. It has nothing to do with a specific color that is being used. So when Luffy learns that he can also code himself with Conqueror's haki, he uses the exact same flow techniques that he learned from Hyōgoro, but with Conqueror's haki, which is why when using Conqueror's coding in a mission with Bajran gun against Kaido, he explicitly says that he is using the haki that he learned from Hyōgoro. One of the clever things about the introduction of Ryūō as a concept is that the people in Wano call all haki by Ryūō, independently if it's armament, conquerors or whatever. In this way, by having Hyōgoro confirm that this usage of the breath of all things is a form of haki, is a form of Ryūō, Oda cleverly is able to establish that it is haki without telling us what type of haki it is, or even if it is a completely new type, which I will call nature haki or Tenshishoku no haki, as it is haki about manipulating natural things, natural elements. Alternatively, we could also call it breath haki to make it clearer what we're talking about. But the issue is color of breath sounds kinda disgusting. Well, we don't have the official name, so it's all kinda arbitrary. This type of haki is about changing the nature of your own ki to match or harmonize with the ki or breath of different things, as the flow of ki is what determines how things move and transform. By mimicking or matching the breath of a specific thing, your haki can act upon it and control it. Of course, that haki is only matching the breath of that particular thing. And so while that energy will be there, it will not interact in the way you wish it to with the breath of different things. That's why your sword becomes able to cut only what you wish to cut and nothing else. For purely energetic things, mimicking their breath with your ki does not only allow you to manipulate them, but to also conjure them. Side note, this is anime logic here, so we're gonna give it a pass, but fire is not a purely energetic phenomenon, it's a combustion involving thus the chemical transformation of actual matter. And also that orange glow you see in fire, yes, those are soot particles emitting thermal radiation. Anyways, much like the different types of dials that evolved to store the breaths of different things, each dial evolving to interact with one particular type of breath, certain humanoid races, by living in different environments, would evolve to have their own spirit, their own ki, become naturally attuned to the breath of certain natural elements that surrounded them. Fishmen and mer people, by evolving to live underwater, evolved to have their own spirit naturally attuned to the breath of water, thus resulting in their natural disposition to be able to manipulate water with the fishmen and mer people martial arts. Minks, possibly due to static electricity that would be generated by their fur, would become more attuned to the breath of electricity, thus having the natural disposition for electro. This is not so different to how some people seem to be born with a natural disposition to observation or conqueror's haki, and how those traits seem to be in some way hereditary. An interesting question then can be brought up. If this is a fourth type of haki, why is it never mentioned as such? Why do even expert haki users seem to classify haki in only 3 different types? Well, because this ability seems to be fairly unknown in the outside world. It is seemingly very well known by the samurai of Wano, as stated by Hyōgoro, which also explains Kin'emon's development of Foxfire style, and the fact that Zoro's master, Shimotsuki Koshiro, a descendant of samurai that came from Wano, knew about this ability. The same way that knowledge from the outside world has difficulty reaching the people of Wano due to its closed borders policy, knowledge from Wano has difficulty reaching the outside world. This fourth haki is thus also the most ample of the colors, and mastering it all is basically impossible. A user knowing the breadth of all things and even knowing how to manipulate it with haki does not mean it suddenly can manipulate all the elements like some avatar on steroids. Much like each of the dials tune themselves to interact with one specific breath, mastering the breath of just one thing is probably a matter of lifetime training, even for a fairly skilled fighter. Even for someone like Zoro, who is basically fated to achieve the title of world's strongest swordsman in his early 20s, it took all the way into Onigashima for him to finally start using Foxfire style that he firstly showed an interest for way back in Punk Hazard, and we still haven't seen him produce any flames yet, like Kin'emon. But okay, it seems like we've answered quite a lot of questions here, but also we created just as many. If everything is ki or breath, then what the hell is meant by a person's ki specifically? Is it the ki of their body? Is it a spiritual energy? Why does the use of the breath of all things by swordsmen look so different than the one we see from fishmen that also looks so different than the one we see by minks? Why does haki behave differently than the breath of all things when interacting with Kitetsu? And why is it that people are able to manipulate ki in all of the seemingly magical ways when using haki? To answer these questions, we gotta understand the Taoist view of the human body and how it relates to Qi. And we can do this by looking at Chinese martial arts, traditional medicine, and alchemy. Compared to other forms of magic power systems, so to say, Qi stands out by the fact that this energy is supposedly the very energy that animates people and that people use to move their bodies, to move their muscles and such. And is an energy that flows through the whole body. And so, unlike, say, the typical Western fantasy concepts of magic that lend themselves better to scholarly types of wizards, a Qi-based power system has an inherent tie to physicality, and so it lends itself much better to fighter types. It is inseparable from martial arts. Because Qi was seen as flowing through one's body, Qigong sought movements to facilitate and control the circulation of Qi. This also directly translates into One Piece's Haki, the way a Haki user moves their body, and in the case of swordsmen or other weapon users, the way that they move their weapon imbued with their own Haki, which is thus acting as an extension of their body, determines the flow of Qi and thus the flow of Haki. Karate focuses on explosive, straight linear strikes. By consequence, Fishman Karate results in explosive, linear movements of water. Jujutsu focuses on grappling techniques. By consequence, Fisherman Jujutsu is comprised of techniques of grappling and throwing water. Swordsmen mostly focus on slashing techniques. The slashing movements they perform is translated to the slashing haki that they put out, which is why uses of the color of nature by swordsmen mainly revolve around cutting various elements. This is something generally ignored by the fandom, but it bears mentioning. The martial arts aspect is as important as the haki aspect. Body and spirits are two halves of one whole. We can also relate this to the separation of Chinese martial arts into external arts and internal arts, Waija and Neija. External arts focus on developing physical prowess, while internal arts focus on developing and controlling your ki. Again, we can relate this to the time skip. Until the time skip, the monster trio had gotten pretty much as far as they could get with sheer physical prowess. They needed to focus on internal training, on learning haki to progress further, but because the physical and spiritual parts are two halves of a whole, developing haki is not just a matter of adding to their strength. Rather, it acts as a multiplying factor to the physical prowess that they had already developed. This is why learning haki was such an immense power-up for them, even though we see plenty of characters who can use haki and are nearly as strong as the monster trio got with the time skip. This concept seems especially not understood in power scaling discussions, where it's common for people to act like knowing haki immediately puts you on a completely different level, unreachable by anyone not proficient in haki, or the thinking that haki is the be-all end-all in terms of power. An extremely linear view on the One Piece power system that's actually a lot more complex. But of course, Qigong was not merely about manipulating Qi by moving your body. It was believed that the flow of Qi could be controlled with the mind, especially with the practice of meditation. And this is central to differentiate internal and external martial arts. While both use Qigong, external martial arts focus more on the physical aspect, while internal martial arts focus on controlling Qi with the mind. In Tai Chi, the most popular and most influential internal martial arts style, there's a popular saying that Qi follows Yi. Yi meaning roughly intellect or intent. So where one focuses the mind, where one focuses their intent, Ki will flow. And this is essentially what Hyōgoro taught Luffy. Rather than straining his body, he was to control the flow of Ki, of Ryūō, with his mind. Because by doing so, he would be able to flow the Ki from parts of the body that didn't need as much to where it was actually going to be used. This is actually the most important and most overlooked aspect of Hyōgoro's teachings. It is precisely this aspect of better utilizing your haki by recruiting the ki from all over your body and concentrating it on your attack that allows Luffy's moves to become that much more powerful. Also, by directing the flow of haki with the mind, it's possible to control it even outside of the body, that is, haki emission. In the context of medicine, cultivating ki was seen mainly as a way to achieve higher longevity, and would get inextricably tied to the Taoist search for immortality and the legends of the Sennin, the flying enlightened immortals. This is why so often in the ancient Taoist descriptions of the Sennin, the immortals, we find ample mentions of how they are experts in breathing, something that was also thought about certain animals that were associated with longevity or immortality, such as the crane or the gibbon, as mentioned by Kumadori when he explained Seimei Kikan as being the techniques of a Sennin. These ties between Qigong and immortality become evident when analyzing the second half of Breath Time Skip. From his fights with Rob Lucci and onwards, Luffy continuously finds himself out of his league and having to sacrifice his lifespan for power in order to just keep up. Together with his powerlessness and the trauma over losing his brother, it all culminates in his mental breakdown. But when he finally puts himself back together and feels ready to go search for his crew, in comes a 76-year-old man literally swimming in the ocean from island to island while killing sea kings with his bare hands, the embodiment of health and an old age itself, to offer Luffy an alternative way to gain power. One, much like Qigong, that will preserve his longevity. Haki, not by coincidence, the first main enemy that Luffy faces right after this training on Qigong, Haki, is someone who was also completely out of his league and sacrificing lifespan for power. Now, of course, we cannot talk about medicine without talking about the arc that is entirely about it, Drum Island. So, traditional Chinese medicine was extremely tied to Chinese alchemy, especially when it comes to producing medical drugs. Pharmacists were basically all alchemists. Chinese alchemy, much like martial arts, was divided into external and internal alchemy, Waidan and Neidan. Both of these were extremely tied to the Taoist search for immortality. Unlike Western alchemy that was principally concerned with transmuting lesser metals into more valuable ones like gold, Waidan was largely focused on developing elixirs of immortality. This mythical elixir of immortality was often not only seen as a substance conferring infinite longevity, but also in being a drug capable of curing all diseases, a panacea. Perhaps the most famous legend of this fabled elixir of immortality is that of the rabbit who pounds the elixir on the moon. So notice how Chopper and Kureha would only descend from the castle during full moon nights, how the mountain with the castle was surrounded by these hordes of aggressive white rabbits, or how the one Chopper calls his little sister, Carrot, is precisely the character with the most numerous and most obvious references to this myth in the series. The most common ingredients in these concoctions were various minerals, but organic compounds were also utilized. A special mention should be given here to the concept of Ji. Coming mainly from the Taoist tradition, this was a term used for various ingredients, typically organic, but most often referring to mushrooms or other fungi, which literally are the root of this word. These substances were seen as having the capability of conferring one with Sennin-style immortality when ingested. Because these legendary immortals were fabled to reside atop large mythical mountains, such as the famed Mount Penglai, this was also the case for these mythical medicinal mushrooms. The traditional Chinese medicine, and especially with its alchemical side, is seen as pseudoscience and, to be a bit more blunt, just quackery by modern medicine. Now, remember how in Drum Island, Chopper was being trained by Dr. Hiruluk, who was seen as a quack doctor. Hiruluk has a seemingly uncurable disease. Chopper, in a desperate attempt in trying to heal him, goes after this legendary ingredient that was rumored to exist by local villagers, a panacea, a cure-all. He goes on this epic quest and finally finds this mythical mushroom atop a huge mountain. The mythical mushroom in question, though, turns out to be actually a deadly poison, and this also ties to traditional Chinese medicine and alchemy. This alchemist, much like Hiruluk himself, was much more of a chemist, or you could even say an alchemist, than he was really a physician, had basically no idea of what they were doing, and would test their elixirs on the patients, often causing very adverse results. Remember that I said that the most common ingredients in these elixirs were of mineral origin? Well, you see, the dun in Waidan and Neidan comes from cinnabar, which was the most common ingredient in these concoctions. Cinnabar also happens to be a naturally occurring compound of mercury. This elixir, supposed to confer immortality or cure any disease, very often turn out to have deadly levels of mercury, arsenic, or other toxic substances, leading to the deaths of a staggering number of Chinese emperors throughout the centuries, making Chinese alchemists have an effectiveness in killing high-ranking politicians, only rivaled by insurrectionary anarchists and royalty, who are next in the line of succession. But of course, here our focus in this video isn't really on medicine, is it? See, the big thing about Hiruluk that inspired Chopper is that he believed that it was possible to cure an entire country and to seemingly perform a miracle by healing a person's spirit. Our true answers here will be found in Neidan, internal alchemy. In Neidan, in almost an analogy to external alchemy, instead of mixing and refining ingredients in a cauldron to then create elixirs to be consumed, the body itself is seen as a cauldron where a person's essence, spirit, and mind is transmuted and refined through various physical, mental, and spiritual practices. Again, with the same goal of longevity and even immortality. Now remember that in Chopper's backstory, this idea of the panacea, of the cure-all, largely revolved around the story told by Hiruluk, where a man, who turned out to be himself, had a seemingly incurable disease but supposedly was cured after being incredibly moved at the sight of cherry blossoms. According to Hiruluk, the cherry blossoms had healed him by cleansing his very spirit. Hiruluk calls it a miracle, but at the same time questions himself if it's really a miracle or if there might be a more scientific explanation for it. The symbolism of the cherry blossom is incredibly central not only to Drum Island but to Chopper in general, and especially to the dream that he inherited from Hiruluk of becoming a doctor that can cure any disease. Now, do you remember what Haki is called in Wano? Yes, cherry blossom flow. Does this seem like mere coincidence to you? And this brings us to the very real doctor who ends up being the one to deliver Hiruluk's cherry blossoms to Drum and as a parting gift to Chopper, Kureha, who managed to maintain her vitality despite being 144 years old, and who throughout the whole arc had this gag of thinking that people were asking her what was the secret to her vitality at such an old age. If only someone had indulged her, because then she would likely have revealed to us Haki and what is its connection to this vital energy. Our understanding of Neidan and how it influenced One Piece will be found through the character of Lao Ji, specifically with chapter 771. You see, Qigong is actually canonically a thing in the One Piece world. It was used by Lao Ji to store up muscle strength from his youth to be used later, allowing him to temporarily regain the vitality and strength of his youth. Lao Ji's Qigong doesn't seem at all like what we generally think of as Haki, yet it is incredibly similar to Seimei Kikan, Life Return, that we see used by members of CP9, namely Kumadori and to a lesser extent Lucci. Now, you might think that this is very different from Haki, that seems to be this purely energetic thing. But is it really? Remember when Enma sucks up Zoro's Haki out of control? As a consequence of it, Zoro's arms seem to lose all of its musculature and turn extremely thin, as if he had been starving for months. But when Zoro pulls back the Haki from Enma, his muscle strength is regained. This seems to defy the way that Haki is commonly interpreted by the fandom as this purely spiritual thing that has nothing to do with your body. Yet we see countless examples of the physicality of Haki, like repeatedly seeing characters running out of stamina due to overusage of Haki. Well, back to Lao Ji. His character and this chapter 771 are filled to the brim with symbolism to Taoism and to Neidan. Lao Ji himself is named after the Chinese word for old combined with Ji, which sounds like old man in Japanese. But it's also a pun on Lao Tzu. In Japan, Lao Tzu is referred by the name Roshi. Does that ring any bells for you? If you've watched Dragon Ball, do you remember Master Roshi, Goku's first master, and who was also a very old man and had an ability to turn extremely buff temporarily by using Qigong? Lao Ji is not only a reference to Lao Tzu, but a reference to Master Roshi, who himself is a reference to Lao Tzu. Ji also happens to be the name of the ruling family of the Zhou dynasty. Lao Ji in this chapter fights Qinzhao and Sai from Kana country, which is blatantly inspired by China, and calls Sai a monkey from Kana country. So you see, a spear-wielding monkey from China, like Son Wukong from Journey to the West, the character that in Japanese is named Son Goku, by whom Goku from Dragon Ball was inspired. This chapter starts by King Elisabello speaking with Zoro about his King Punch and calling it his family heirloom. Zoro tells Elisabello that he should preserve this family treasure. Later, Sai talks to Don Qinzhao about the 8 treasures and the 2 treasures. Those are respectively the Happo Navy that he is set to inherit from his family and the Nihon Navy of another family that he would get through an arranged marriage. Further, still in this chapter, Qinzhao states that Sai has finally inherited their family Hashoken, and that with it, Sai should be able to break the jewel sheet of ice and thus gain access to the treasure accumulated by their family. So, what's with all this talk of inherited family treasures, and especially ones that you should preserve? This is a hint to perhaps the most important concept in Neidan, the Sanbao, the 3 treasures. Those are Jing, essentially meaning essence, Qi, here referring to that vital energy Qi, not necessarily to, everything, and Shen, meaning mind or spirit. The three treasures are specifically mentioned in Journey to the West, where Son Wukong, Son Goku, is instructed on their importance by an enlightened Taoist sage. Now, you might think that using this more restrictive definition of Qi and then adding these two concepts of Jing and Shen means that this theory is counter to the idea of Qi being the essence of everything. But you see, it isn't. It's actually very much based on it. Let me make an analogy with you. Imagine you tell me that you haven't eaten for a long time and that because of it you are feeling without energy. To which I respond by saying, what the hell do you mean by without energy? Everything is energy. We know this because of mass energy equivalency. And in fact, just 1 kilogram, the average person weighing around 70 kilograms, has more energy than what you'd get from burning 2.6 billion liters of gasoline. But of course, this knowledge doesn't make you any more energetic nor any less starved. Of course, energy is everything, just like Qi can be viewed as energy and is everything. But when we talk about a person's energy, we are talking about bioavailable energy. Energy that a person can use to move their body and that the body uses up to function. The energy that our body gets from chemically reacting the food that we eat with the air that we breathe. This division between Jing, Qi, and Shen actually follows that previously established idea that different forms of Qi, mainly at different densities, will result in different substances. In this case, going from the denser, rougher Jing to the most ethereal and refined Shen. A common analogy to explain the three treasures is with a candle. Jing is the wax and wick that get consumed as the candle burns and thus determine its lifespan. Qi is the fire, the energy, and Shen is the light emitted by the fire. It similarly expresses the differentiation of the treasures by density, from densest to lightest, or from the solid, most material, to the most ethereal. Now, what the hell is meant by Jing exactly? So this is a term that is difficult to define and even more difficult to explain. Jing was often associated with an essence that was believed to be stored in the kidneys, and specifically one that would be depleted by nutting. Yeah, I mean this seriously. So, see, all the three treasures were divided into prenatal forms, ones that you get from your parents, and postnatal forms, ones that you get throughout life, kind of like a nature and nurture thing. Prenatal Jing was generally believed to come from semen. Jing was essentially an ancient way of trying to explain physical vitality and the process of aging. Jing, especially when referring to prenatal Jing, was believed to be spent throughout life and near impossible to replenish. The body running out of Jing is essentially the body running out of physical material vitality and was seen as the causer of aging. Different lifestyle choices, specifically overexertion of the body, could lead to an overexhaustion of Jing, which would result in a decrease of one's lifespan. We see a very similar concept to this with Rob Lucci's comments on how Gear-2 causes an overexertion of Luffy's body and thus cuts at his lifespan. Or, when later in Impel Down, to give Luffy a chance of surviving, Ivankov injects hormones that cause an overexertion of Luffy's body and thus also cut his lifespan. And as we'll see, it is no coincidence that this is when Ivankov gives us an explanation to Hiruluk's questioning about miracles, and that after surviving this, we see clearly for the first time Luffy using the fast digestion technique of Seimei Kikan that nowadays characters regularly comment upon, always noting how unnatural it is. In more general terms, Jing is essentially the material basis for life. If Shen refers to your mind and Qi refers to your bioavailable energy, Jing roughly refers to your body itself. This is especially apparent by looking at how in the Huainanzi, Jing is substituted for Xing, meaning form, shape, or body. As it is put in the Huainanzi, Xing is the residence of life. The Qi fills this life while Shen controls it. If either of them loses their proper position, they will all come to harm. In more modern terms, we can think of prenatal Jing as the genetics you inherit from your parents, or in One Piece terms, lineage factor, and postnatal Jing to the growth and development of your body due to time, nutrition, and exercise. Now, Shen also translates pretty much directly into a concept in One Piece, and by that I mean voice. We first hear of this voice in Skypiea when Gunfao explains that mantra, which we later find out is just a different name for observation haki, can sense people's presence and their intentions by listening to a voice that exists inside of each person's body. The concept of voice is famously referred to again when Rayleigh says that Roger could hear the voice of all things. This ability later being told to us as something that could be used to decipher the poneglyphs even without understanding their language. But the most common use of the concept of voice throughout the series is to refer to someone's presence and aliveness, as in characters will equate a person being alive to their voice still being there. The key to understand what voice really means is found when Mother Caramel used the powers of the Sorusornomi, the soul fruit, to create a sun homie out of fire. When doing so, she says that by giving this fire a soul and thus imbuing it with a mind, with sentience, she is giving it a voice. But there's a specific reason, I think, that Oda chose specifically this word voice to refer to consciousness. And it's got to do with that analogy of the candle. It serves the same purpose, yet instead it builds upon that original meaning of ki as breath. So when we think about breath and voice, you have your physical body, the air that you inhale and exhale for energy, the breath, and from this interaction between the breath and the body, the interaction of the moving air with the respiratory system and the vocal cords, voice is created. The difference between breath and voice is first one of substance. Again, we have the body as the densest, most material, most solid, the breath as a gas in the middle, and then the voice as pressure waves that travel through the air as the most ethereal. And it also carries the meaning about the purpose of each thing, because unlike breath, voice carries information, is what we use to convey feelings, thoughts, experiences. Voice is how we can convey conscious experience to others. Anyways, let's try to summarize. You have your physical body, the energy that your body uses to function, and the mind that arises from it. So Nathan thought about the body as a cauldron where these treasures would be converted one into the other. This would happen at 3 elixir fields, the Dantians. The lower dantian was believed to be located roughly at the abdomen or at the pelvis. This is where Jing was refined into Qi. The middle dantian was believed to be located at the thorax, specifically at the heart. This is where Qi was refined into Shen. And finally, the upper dantian was located at the head, specifically between the eyebrows in the region of the pineal gland. That was associated in various mysticism with the concept of the third eye, is where Shen is refined into emptiness. This is sometimes referred to as Wu Ji or Wu Wei. Shen being refined into emptiness roughly means to return or become one with the Tao, the natural order of the universe. A concept that bears some resemblance to the Buddhist concept of nirvana, and that would get inextricably tied to it with the arrival of Buddhism in China. Now, let's go back to chapter 771. Right in the color spread, you'll notice, not very sneakily, the number 7 right in the front. So if you go to volume 7, that is the one named Kuso Jiji, meaning shitty old man. Now, by the title and the content of chapter 771, I imagine that this reference is intentional. So this volume is named like this because this is when we learn about Sanji's backstory of starvation. Specifically, we do so in the chapter with the same name. In this chapter, we see Sanji starve over 80 days and become extremely thin and emaciated from it, and Zeph resorting to eating his own leg to be able to survive. The fact that this reference is intentional is further made clear by the fact that chapter 771 itself had another backstory of starvation, Baby 5's backstory. Now let's try to relate this to what we see when Zoro get his Haki sucked by an out-of-control Enma. If Haki has anything to do with this vital energy chi or bioavailable energy chi that we talked about, then doesn't it just make perfect sense that by Enma sucking it uncontrollably, what we would see is Zoro's body consuming itself, mainly its fat and muscle mass, for energy, exactly like what we would see in a starving person, and exactly like what we actually see happening with Zoro. Or in other words, when Chi runs out, Jin gets converted into Chi. So okay, it seems like we have an answer to what a person's Chi or energy actually is. But is controlling this Chi the same thing as Haki? See, any normal person can control their bodily energy in a way. When you move your body parts around, you are consciously using your bioavailable energy to activate your muscles. Yet, this is not really what comes to mind when you think about Haki, is it? Haki doesn't seem like this simple biological process. There's a reason people tend to think of Haki as something purely spiritual. It's because Haki feels like something almost magical, something supernatural. Well, we thankfully have a very interesting speech about the seemingly most magical, supernatural things in One Piece, devil fruits, by none other than the most intelligent scientist in the One Piece world, in which he precisely talks about what it means for something to be unnatural. Vegapunk says that devil fruit powers are unnatural because they are born out of people's imaginations, out of people's wishes and dreams of what they could be. Now, why would this be the case? So, there's a very interesting passage in the self-named book Confucian scholar Shunzi. Shunzi states that fire and water have chi but do not have life. Grasses and trees have life but do not have perceptivity. Fowl and beasts have perceptivity but do not have yi, meaning a sense of justice, of morality, of right and wrong. Humans have chi, life, perceptivity, and yi. We can make a very direct analogy to this with what we see in One Piece. Everything has a breath, everything has ki, but non-living things do not have life. Plants and fungi, bacteria, etc. have life, but do not have a voice. They do not have consciousness, sentience. Non-intelligent animals have a voice, but they are moved by instinct. They do not have higher aspirations. They do not have dreams and ambition, meaning they do not have Haki. People have chi, life, voice, and Haki. Let's think about dreams and ambition and how it relates to the unnatural. Again, animals are purely moved by natural instincts, and because of this, they do not really alter the natural order of things. But because humans have dreams and ambition, we can create things that go way beyond pure survival. We can create culture, art, technology, science, civilization. Because humans have dreams and ambition, we can alter the natural flow of things and create the unnatural, the artificial. Because humans have reason, the ability to think, abstract, to philosophize, to imagine, we can talk about a natural world of material reality and an unnatural world of ideas. So if in the world of One Piece, wishes have this power to manifest in reality, then people's wishes, specifically born out of this world of ideas, can materialize in ways that defy nature. Vegapunk, through his speech, lays out a foundation from which you can understand that which goes against the natural order, like the supernatural, as being the product of dreams and ambition. So Haki would be voice or Shen controlling energy or chi, but doing so through ambition, so in ways that define nature, meaning it's unnatural or supernatural. And if people's wishes can change the flow of reality, the first thing, the first chi that you would expect them to change is the very energy that their mind stems from, the very breath that generates their voice. Remember the concept that ki is in a way everything, and that the flow of ki is what determines how the universe evolves. So if we can imagine the evolution of things, of the universe itself, like a flowing stream of water, then human dreams and ambition are like a hand that's purposely dipped in the water to alter its flow. In this way, Haki, by changing the natural flow of ki, changes the evolution of things. It changes destiny. This seems especially the case when looking at future sight. Notice that through Haki, a user can see the future, that is, they can see how things are meant to evolve, but then can go and purposefully change that future. This might seem like it's getting into some unimportant philosophy, but I think now that we are in the final saga, and prophecies are a major part of the story, this idea that Haki can change destiny is very important to keep in mind. In the way that Haki changes the destined flow of ki, and by doing so change the destined flow of ki around it, it is ki that reigns supreme over others. Now, what is an ambition compared to a regular dream? Well, an ambition is a dream that you try to realize with your own effort. That is, a dream to which you put your own energy. In summary, Haki is a person's energy or ki being manipulated in unnatural or supernatural ways through ambition. Because Haki manipulates a person's own bioavailable energy, using Haki is physically tiring. Overusing Haki depletes your stamina, and using Haki when lacking in vitality not only is difficult, but can result in damage to the body. Like for example, when old Whitebeard in Marineford has a heart attack when trying to use Conqueror's Haki. So, if Haki defies nature, if it defies the natural evolution of things, this means that when someone emits or coats something in Haki, that ki, is then in an unnatural state. And thus, it can only be maintained in this unnatural state through a person's willpower, through a person's ambition. But as soon as that willpower is no longer being applied, that ki will follow its natural course and leave this unnatural state. Thus why Haki, once no longer being intentionally applied, will dissipate. While we're not really talking in any scientific terms here, I think it can be useful here to understand the physics notion of stability. A system is stable if it is in its state of lowest potential energy. The easiest case to imagine is that of an object in a valley. If it is at the bottom of the valley, where it has its lowest gravitational potential energy, it will remain there. But if we want to take it up the valley and maintain it there, we need to apply a force, otherwise the object will simply roll back down. We can pretty directly relate this to Haki. Haki puts ki in an unnatural state. Once it is no longer being applied, will transition into a stable state. It will dissipate. If Kitetsu is able to permanently store Haki, it means that it offers an environment where ki that would otherwise be in an unstable state can be stable. So if someone is coating something outside of their body with Haki, that means that that ki is in an unstable state, and it's only being maintained in that unnatural state by a person's willpower. Once Kitetsu comes in contact with that Haki, that Haki now has a new stable state that it will transition to. Kinda like if we're trying to roll that ball up the hill, but suddenly in front of it another deep valley appears. It will just roll to the bottom of that new valley, which offers a new stable state for it. Ki that is not Haki is not being maintained in an unnatural state. It is already in its natural state. Thus why Kitetsu will not naturally absorb the ki or breath of all things. It will only naturally absorb Haki. Now let's think back about Enma. Enma is able to channel a person's Haki even more than the Haki that the person is consciously outputting. This means that somehow Kozaburo was able to forge Enma in such a way that even the ki that was stable inside of the wielder's body will be absorbed by the blade. Thus, Kitetsu, if properly forged, can somehow provide an even more stable environment for ki than its naturally occurring environment. But of course, Enma doesn't just draw out a user's ki, it outputs that Haki. That stability can somehow be affected, controlled by this Haki that was used to curse Enma. And then we can directly relate this to the dials. Even though natural elements are in their natural stable state, these animals have evolved to be able to control the properties of the Kitetsu in their body such that upon command it will absorb the breath of certain elements even when those elements are already in their naturally occurring state, and again upon command will release that breath. Because when worked properly, the degree with which Kitetsu is able to stabilize ki can be controlled past the limits of its naturally occurring form. Of course, with Haki, ki doesn't necessarily only flow through a person's body. It's possible to flow that ki into an object, normally the user's weapons. This is commonly called imbuement. And here also we need to differentiate between imbuement, coding, and emission. Imbuement is about flowing the Haki into an object or a medium. first, we can see that this isn't the same thing as coating, as the Haki is flown into the actual object rather than coating the surface. And it also must be different from emission, otherwise anyone who's capable of coating their weapon with armament, which seems to be a fairly basic use of armament, should be able to do Haki emission, which clearly isn't the case. It seems that it's much easier to flow the Haki into a solid medium, like a sword or a gun or an arrow, than it is to flow it into the air itself. But I don't think it has much, if anything, to do with the medium in question being solid or not. Here's what I think is the really important concept to pay attention to. Attunement, connection. I've been mentioning this concept throughout the video without fully delving into it, so let's do it. Though ki is everything, not all types of ki will have the same strength of interaction with different types of ki. When talking about attunement, this is fundamentally what I'm talking about. A person close to death has the ki, the breath that gives rise to their voice, closer to the breath of inanimate, non-sentient things, and so more attuned to them, more strongly interacting with them, and thus more perceptive of them. The ki in form of someone's haki will clash with the haki of a different person, but not necessarily with the air, water, or whatever other substance is around them. This attunement can be harmonious in the way that a weapon user closely connected with their weapon, used to its feeling, to its breath, can attune their own haki to the weapon to imbue it as if it was part of their own body. Or this attunement can be dissonant, like the conqueror's haki of two different individuals is similar in nature but act in opposition to one another, resulting in a violent clash instead of a harmonious fusion, like attractive versus repulsive forces. Repulsion between opposing haki causes a clash and keeps them from occupying the same space. Attraction between a user's haki and their weapon causes the haki to remain bound to it. This concept of the weapon acting as an extension of the user's body will also give us the answer as to why devil fruit users that have a power of a certain element or substance can imbue that substance with their haki even when it's completely disconnected from their body, because the devil fruit power turns them into the very embodiment of that element or substance. Anytime said material is being controlled by their devil fruit power, it is quite literally an extension of their own body. Of course, this also creates a bit of a problem for me for the first video of G.U.S.T, because in it, when talking about Imu's haki being fused into the world's waters, I use the terms coating and imbuement interchangeably. Yeah, sorry about that, guys. Making sure I properly understand what I'm talking about, so I have to make as few of these corrections later down the line, is part of why these videos take so goddamn long. But yeah, one example that any kid out there will be taught on attractive forces is how static electricity in like a hair comb or a rubber balloon can attract small pieces of paper. And then we can also relate this to Vivre Cards, this special kind of paper that is crafted with some individuals' nail clippings or hair. What we know about it is that it's way more resistant than regular paper, being fireproof and waterproof, that if you tear pieces of it apart, they will keep being attracted to each other no matter where they are in the world, and that their size displays the life force of the individual whose body the paper was made of. For the vast majority of the Vivre Cards, we do not know who it was that crafted them, but Luffy's Vivre Card we know was arranged to be made by Sabo, though we don't know who specifically it was that made it. Now, remember who it was that first introduced to us Kitetsu as a material? Koala, right? Who spoke of it with Dragon, where it is written to mean sake iron, telling Dragon that weapons that they apprehended in Dressrosa were made of it. So clearly Koala, or at least someone in Sabo's gang that was in Dressrosa, knows about the basics of Kitetsu. So are Vivre Cards made with Kitetsu? Would make sense, right? Ace's Vivre Card, we find out, was made by Yamato. So remember from the last video who I said specialized in working with Kitetsu and likely founded the Kitetsu School of Blacksmithing? Of course, the Kozuki. So it's interesting to me that in Wano we learned that the very first Vivre Card we ever see was actually made by Yamato, who had read Kozuki Oden's diary and wanted to emulate and carry on Oden's will. Remember, the Kozuki were not known as great linguists or whatever. No, they were known specifically as great stonemasons. It is their crafting ability that they were known for. So if Oden wanted to leave in his logbook important information for the future generations, how likely would it be that he wouldn't leave any information about his clan's renowned crafting techniques? Yamato likely learned how to make Vivre Cards by reading Oden's logbook, and likely learn how to work with Kitetsu in general. I don't want to really delve into this because it has nothing to do with this particular video, but you know, I am mostly known for the Sunny 13 theory, in which I claimed that Yamato would be the 12th crew member. And, well, going with those 4 per se theories, what is really the similarity between the 3rd member to join in HC, Usopp and Frankie? It's that they are craftsmen. Yamato could share their similarity and potentially add a lot to the Straw Hat's arsenal if he happens to specialize in the Kozuki's Kitetsu school of blacksmithing. And considering the name Kitetsu was first introduced to us with the Kitetsu blades, specifically written to mean Oni piercer, I guess it's fitting that our Kitetsu blacksmith is an Oni. So by making a piece of paper imbued with a small amount of Kitetsu, through some special process, Chi from the nail clippings or whatever other sample from an individual is bound to the Kitetsu in the paper. This binding force also results in the paper becoming more resistant. But even when pieces of the paper are torn apart, this binding force does not disappear. It keeps attracting the pieces of paper to each other. This ki that the paper is infused with is also attuned to the individual that it comes from. And so because of whatever particular process is involved in making the Vivre Cards, the paper will burn away as that individual's life force fades. So, Haki so far has been divided into 3 colors or shades: armament, observation, and the color of the Supreme King, commonly called conquerors. So, firstly, being named color kind of implies that it's not really about the shape or the movement of the Haki, it's about the nature of it. Each color can be seen as a type of nature change of the Haki for different applications, and because, as we know, what controls Haki is ambition, therefore each of the different colors is related to a different type of ambition. But now I'm claiming that there aren't actually 3 colors of Haki, but 4. Well, wrong actually. I'm claiming there are 5 colors of Haki. I just haven't really talked about the 5th. But if there really are 5 forms of Haki, and if they have existed for so long in the story, there should be some kind of hinting towards this, right? Now, the chapter that really explains the 3 basic forms of Haki for us is called 3D 2Y, and in it is explained to us that this 3D 2Y was a secret message, that they were not to meet in the previously established 3 days, but rather in 2 years. Could there be a second layer to this secret message? Like there are 3 known colors of Haki presented in the chapter, there are another 2 secret ones. And that's why it names the chapter in which the 3 different forms of Haki are explained to us. It's a bit of a stretch, isn't it? Actually, one of the biggest hints comes from this naming convention of the different Haki types as colors by using the Japanese counter for colors Shoku. Red, yellow, blue, black, and white are the 5 colors from Chinese mythology, associated with the 5 rulers from the 5 directions, the 5 phases, etc. And in Chinese mythology, this comes largely from this myth that the heavens were sewn together with 5 different colors for the different directions: black in the north, red in the south, blue in the east, white in the west, and yellow in the center. Kind of important to note here, it's actually not blue. The Chinese name Qing doesn't really directly translate to English. It actually encompasses a range of colors that include both blue and green, which is why this is the color associated with the wood phase, and why in depictions of the Azure Dragon he will often be colored green. In Taoism, the number 5 is very reoccurring, with things like the 5 emperors, one of them obviously being the Yellow Emperor, the highest deities of the 5 regions, one of them obviously being the Yellow Emperor, the 5 constellations, one of them obviously being the Yellow Dragon, which is the animal form of the Yellow Emperor. This guy is everywhere, and especially the 5 phases. This was basically what were believed to be the 5 basic aspects of matter, or the 5 different phases of Qi: fire, earth, metal, water, and wood. This is again an extremely old concept. It appears way back in the Yellow Emperor's canon and all throughout traditional Chinese medicine and martial arts. It also ties into Taoist cosmology. This diagram here is the first ever example of the Taijitu, that is, the symbol of Yin and Yang. Prior to this, Yin and Yang were most often represented by their respective animals, the black dragon and the white tiger. This here is a basic diagram of Taoist cosmology. Wuji becomes differentiated into the aspects of Yin and Yang. The movement between Yin and Yang gives rise to Qi. Qi becomes the 5 phases, and those give rise to 10,000 things, which is just the old Chinese way of saying everything. This system would also be brought to Japan by the name Kogyo, and there would become correlated to a separate similar system coming from Buddhism of 5 elements, Godai. Now, it's important here to understand that while Wuxing, that is the 5 phases, were likely an inspiration for these 5 natures of Haki, trying to associate each color of Haki to a specific phase is likely a fool's errand. The 5 phases would quickly become associated with a million different things. The 5 colors, the 5 classical planets, 5 virtues, 5 emotions, the 5 main organs in traditional Chinese medicine, the 5 directions, the seasons, tastes, smells, music. There are way too many associations for this system to be followed rigidly. It would allow Oda zero creative liberty. Other authors use systems that seem inspired by the 5 phases, but give themselves great liberties when doing so. Naruto uses Godai for its nature releases, but replaces Void with Lightning and then adds a bunch of intermediate elements through Kekkei Genkai. Demon Slayer has 5 basic forms of breath, again seemingly based on Godai but substituting Void for thunder and earth for stone, and then it adds extra breathing types that are derived from those. Hunter x Hunter has 5 basic types of men in the form of enhancement, emission, manipulation, conjuring, and transmutation, and then also a 6th specialization type for all the bullshit powers that Togashi wants to add that don't really fit any of the previous categories. Now, between Wuxing and Godai, I would say that there seems to be some kind of light correspondence between the different colors of Haki and the elements in Godai. To some in particular, these correspondences are really important, to others they're not really, if at all. We should understand that the 5 phases are an inspiration, but only loosely translate into the different shades of Haki. But why in the One Piece world would these 2 other colors of Haki be unknown by the general population? And I can't help but think here that it has something to do with the world government. So, I spent pretty much this whole video talking about how Haki is almost entirely based on the Taoist philosophical tradition. At the same time, I've also explained how what makes Haki so different from other forms of Ki, of breath, is that it is unnatural, from being born out of people's dreams and ambitions. And this could be a problem, right? Because Taoism is all about the Tao, the natural order of the universe, and how one should align themselves to it. So isn't Haki precisely the opposite of what is preached by Taoism? As if that was not damning enough, you will find plenty of mentions in the Tao Te Ching specifically speaking against ambition, striving, desires, and even controlling the breath. Yeah, it doesn't look too good, right? While again there are many different translations and interpretations of the Tao Te Ching, a general position against striving and changing nature's flow is at the very least a valid one. And to me, this here is not only very enlightening on the actions of the world government, but of Imu specifically. Remember how there's all this symbolism and hints about Imu surrounding this image of the Buddha? And remember all the syncretism and mixing between Taoism and Buddhism, the similarities and correlations between Nirvana, Buddhahood, and Taoist enlightenment and immortality, and Imu being based in part in Taoist sages seems almost obvious in retrospect, considering Imu is the one who has actually achieved immortality. If you can look at Imu as a sage of sorts, holding this view, inspired by specific interpretations of Taoism, we can understand, first, why the world government is so preoccupied with maintaining the balance of the world, and why Imu would specifically seek to target devil fruit users for their unnaturalness. And by the same logic, Imu should also try to keep people from using Haki. What I'm saying is that at the end of the Void Century, along with knowledge of the ancient kingdom and the events of the Void Century, Imu sought to erase knowledge about Haki from history. Or rather, I should say that Imu succeeded in erasing knowledge about Ryūō from history. That this power is named Ryūō in Wano because this name precedes Haki, and that this power was likely only named Haki as people started to rediscover it after the Void Century. So rather than the government erasing two forms of Haki from history, it tried and mostly succeeded in erasing it all from history. And rather, the colors that are now known are only the ones that have been rediscovered since then. Now, why these colors specifically would get rediscovered? Well, for one, it's pretty much impossible to keep people from rediscovering observation, as some people are straight up born with the ability to use it. Similarly, Conqueror's Haki is a power that we see frequently being used unconsciously in cases of emotional outburst. For both of these colors, the ability can be used without the person even knowing of its existence, and when it happens, its effects are very clear and easy to distinguish. As for armament, the moment that theories about being able to control your energy emerge, using that energy to protect yourself or enhance your attacks is basically the most natural and obvious development, as can be seen with all the claims of iron shirt, iron palm, and similar techniques from real-life Qigong. As for the two hidden Haki colors, they happen to have some unique complexities that make them particularly difficult to rediscover and understand. But I'll have to explain this fully when I talk about these powers in depth individually. But I'm not just saying here that Imu erased knowledge about Haki at the end of the Void Century, and that was that. Rather, it seems a lot more likely that the world government would continue to this day to curtail the spread of knowledge of Haki. And once you understand this, the way that Haki was introduced into the story becomes a lot clearer. See, I think the biggest reason why people believe that Haki is a retcon is that it is only towards the later half of pre-timeskip that this power starts to be referred to explicitly, and only at its very end that it's actually explained to us. Before this, if you look deeply enough, you will find many instances of Haki being used. You will find even explanations about how it works, but it all seems to be given in this kind of secretive way. Essentially, the issue is that Haki not being a retcon relies on the vast majority of the characters we meet pre-timeskip not knowing of even Haki's existence, even though now usage of Haki is completely commonplace. Even the people who don't use it know it exists. Now specifically, a big changing point seems to happen in Amazon Lily. The Kuja pirates coat their arrows in armament Haki to make them more powerful. When Luffy sees Margaret's Haki-infused arrows destroying rocks and tree trunks, he's baffled at what he's seeing because he has zero knowledge about Haki. But more interestingly, Margaret is baffled at Luffy being baffled. She's like, of course they're strong, they're infused with Haki. Margaret acts like everyone is supposed to know about Haki. How can this guy not know about Haki? Everyone knows about Haki. Is Oda gaslighting us here? This is chapter 516, and this power has hardly been mentioned at all previously. And now suddenly we have this character acting like this is just a common thing, that this is a common power that everyone is supposed to know about. Yet it is precisely this chapter that tells us the reason for this discrepancy. In the scene directly preceding this one, we learn that Amazon Lily is on the Calm Belt, and so no one is able to sail to or from the island due to the Sea King infested waters other than the Pirate Empress's ship that is drawn by special sea snakes. And in the scene directly after, we learn that not even Vegapunk's technology of coating marine ships with sea stone is 100% Sea King proof, and that crossing these waters is still immensely dangerous, and that the world government is not even allowed to come within 3 kilometers of Amazon Lily. Due to Amazon Lily being on the Calm Belt, it has been outside of world government control since the Void Century, and recently, after Vegapunk developed the technology allowing marine ships to cross the Calm Belt, Boa Hancock kept Amazon Lily outside of world government control by taking the position of warlord. So you see, the one place where knowledge of Haki is widespread and people talk about it openly is the one that has been completely outside of world government control. And you'll see this pattern elsewhere. We learn about observation Haki for the first time as mantra in Skypiea, which due to being a sky island is outside of world government control, as likely is the sky island of Burka, where Anno and his priests came from. Likewise, Fishman Island, where a variant of nature Haki is openly practiced as Fishman Karate, has been a target since the Void Century of world government persecution, and recently has only been protected by the might of the emperors. Or Zou, where the minks practice Electro, is a Phantom Island and outside of world government control. Or Wano, where knowledge about Ryūō has been maintained, is built like a natural fortress and since the Void Century has been outside of world government control. Thus also connecting back to our first ever description of a Haki ability being delivered by a descendant of Wano samurai. And of course, now after the time skip is when conversations about Haki are commonplace, because the New World is the ocean largely controlled by the 4 emperors, and thus largely outside of world government control. Now think about how Kuma seemed to send the Straw Hats specifically to places where they could train to get stronger according to their own individual talents. And then it starts to make sense why he would send Luffy, who clearly needed to learn Haki more than anything, to Amazon Lily, an island where Haki is openly practiced by nearly everyone due to being outside of world government jurisdiction. And while there is the whole ban on man problem, Luffy had just earned his spot on the newspapers by decking a celestial dragon, and I'm gonna take a guess that Kuma had at least a sneaky suspicion that Hancock despised them, and that she's not nearly as vicious as she makes herself to be. You know, my man's a pretty good judge of character. I mean, it seems he knew somehow that Mihawk would actually agree to train Zoro. So you see, Haki is a retcon in the same way that the poneglyphs are a retcon, or the ancient weapons are a retcon, or the ancient kingdom is a retcon, or Joy Boy is a retcon. And by that I mean it isn't. It's another part of this huge lore of the world that is hidden from the common people by a massive censorship apparatus, and that thus gets revealed to us readers slowly as the Straw Hats progress through the Grand Line towards Laughdale, where presumably these mysteries will finally be fully explained. Wanting to keep people from using these unnatural powers could be one way to view what the Tao Te Ching preaches as having man being like an uncarved log, or a way to view Wu Wei to avoid going against the flow of nature, moving only as nature intended. But okay, Imu wants to keep people from using Haki, but uses Haki to oppress devil fruit users. In the same way, Imu's absurdly oppressive government is completely against the notion of Wu Wei as it pertains to politics and leadership, the non-action of the ruler of letting people be, interfering the least in people's affairs. Yeah, it's hypocritical, isn't it? And I believe that's part of the point. There is actually a very interesting passage in the Tao Te Ching about rulers of old who had mastery of the Tao. Lao Tzu states that they did not use it to enlighten the people, but rather to make them ignorant, that people are difficult to rule because they know too much. And so he concludes that one who governs a nation without wisdom blesses it, and one who governs a nation with it becomes its robber. While at face value, you'd think having an immortal, enlightened Taoist sage as a ruler in a work of fiction so heavily inspired by Taoism would be a good thing. It is precisely because Imu is a master in the Tao that Imu keeps people ignorant and robs them of even their most basic material wealth, of their history, of their lives, and even of their dreams. But this here isn't really a theory video on Imu. Rather, it's important here to see if there might be any counterposition to this. Keeping people from dreaming is an idea that goes far back in One Piece, all the way to Jaya, specifically through Bellamy, who believed in a new age, that the age of dreams was over, that pursuing your dreams is foolishness, and that imagination is a weakness. Yet Bellamy was not the one who came up with this philosophy, rather he merely shared the beliefs of his boss, Doflamingo, a character who, not by coincidence, has some of the most blatant parallels to Emu in the entire series. Which, considering what we just went through, I guess we can add the fact that Lao Ji was specifically working for Doflamingo to this list. And even this notion of oppressing people because they go against nature goes way back to Enel, who used this as his reasoning to try to annihilate Skypiea. Again, pay attention to the parallels here. Yet it is this very arc of Jaya which points out the issue with this philosophy, and I think you all know what scene in particular I'm talking about.
海賊が夢を見る時代が終わるって？おい！なんだ人の夢は終わらねえ！そうだろう！
One of the most impactful speeches in the entire series, not by coincidence, some chapters later, still in Jaya, it is precisely Blackbeard that gives us our first direct use of the term Haki. And no, this isn't some generic mention of ambition. It happens in chapter 234, which first of all is suspiciously named Please Remember. It is also the chapter that introduces Sengoku, Tsuru, Whitebeard, gives us bounties for Doflamingo and Kuma, has the comeback of Mihawk and Shanks, the formal introduction to the Blackbeard pirates. We have Rockstar, who definitely wasn't put here as some weird foreshadowing to one guy in particular, and has Luffy proposing Blackbeard as the next Shichibukai. If you don't remember, this here is what's gonna cause Blackbeard to hand Ace to the Marines, and thus ultimately snowball into Marineford War. So yeah, Haki is name dropped for the first time by Blackbeard in arguably the most important setup chapter in the entire series. Yet this is not the first time we hear this, that people's dreams cannot be stopped is stated to us as Goldie Rogers' words in chapter 100. As much as Imu and the world government try, people's dreams have no end. Though our dreams and ambition go against nature, dreaming is our nature. And so to try to keep people from dreaming, ironically, is going against nature itself, as proven by the Leviathan that is the world government that needs to be put in place to even attempt to stop people from dreaming. But doesn't that mean that it is people's very nature to be unnatural? It's a bit of a paradox, isn't it? And thus we have to wonder how we go about solving it. If abandoning dreaming is not true Wu Wei, is not really in harmony with the Tao, what is then? This opposition between dreams and nature is symbolized in One Piece by the duality of spear and sword. You will frequently see lifelong rivals, one wielding spear and the other wielding sword. Many people have noticed this already. Whitebeard and Roger, Nekomamushi and Inuarashi, the statues on the entrance to Holy Land Marijoa, and also with Sanji and Zoro, specifically through the words of their masters. According to Sanji's master, Zeph, the true spear is the one that comes from your guts. It was the spear that allowed Luffy to keep pressing forward and get through any weapons, armor, shield, or defense of any kind that Krieg put in front of him. Zeph tells Sanji that he had stifled his own spear for no good reason. That is because Sanji had given up on his dream. He had thrown away his ambition. The greatest spear that Zeph speaks of that can pierce through any obstacle is one's conviction in their dreams and ambition. Yet the way that Zoro's master, Koshiro, describes the greatest sword is very different. To Koshiro, the truest sword is precisely not one that cuts through anything it touches. A true sword is one that cuts only what it wishes to cut and doesn't cut what it wishes to protect. the greatest sword is one that can cut nothing. And this ability comes precisely from one understanding the nature of the world around them and aligning themselves with it. While the greatest spear is marked by not differentiating the obstacles that lie in front of it and piercing through them all the same, the greatest sword is marked by its ability to tell apart what lies in front of it and to align its behavior to it. Even with Sanji's and Zoro's blood families, you will see the symbolism of spear and sword. Interestingly, Sanji and Zoro, in their respective journeys, remembering the teachings of their masters, start at opposite places from each other and end at opposite places from each other. Zoro, as he states so himself, only knows how to press forward. Yet that is not enough to get through the obstacle in front of him. He has to learn how to discern the nature of the world and align himself with it. And the difference that this alignment and understanding of nature makes could not be more stark. The same enemy who had taken 0 damage from all his attacks so far and made him halfway dead, seemingly an unbeatable obstacle that his spear of conviction simply could not pierce through, now goes down with one single slash. Sanji only knows how to look at the nature of the world and accept it, and he knows to discern between the things to protect and the things to attack, but that keeps him stuck forever on the same spot. He has to learn how to press forward with his convictions like the spear. So the spear that presses forward symbolizes the conviction to press on with your dreams and ambitions despite any obstacles presented by the world, while the sword that splits things apart symbolizes discernment, the capacity to understand both the similarities and the differences between things, to separate reality from delusion, the capacity to understand the nature of the world around you and align yourself with it, like the opposition between dreams and nature, between imagination and reality, or between reason and instinct, or like the opposition between yang and yin. Yet must these things necessarily be in conflict with each other? Another duo whose character writing is deeply influenced by this dichotomy of spear and sword is Kaugara and Mont Blanc Noland. The spear-wielding Kaugara is a spiritual man with unshakable conviction. No matter the obstacle that stands in his way, he presses forward all the same. No matter how many try to invade the land of his people, he would defeat them all with the conviction to protect his people and the wishes of his ancestors. And even when his island was shot into the sky, putting him into a completely different environment, robbed of his very breath from the sharp increase in altitude, faced with circumstances that he had no understanding of, and an army of enemies of much greater numbers to protect his people and their land, to protect the wishes of his ancestors, and especially to ring the bell of Shandora, to guide Noland so that they can meet once again as they promised, he pressed through it all and continued fighting till the moment he died. His spear pressed forward to pierce through any and all obstacle, no matter how insurmountable, that the world placed in front of his dreams. The sword-wielding Noland was a man of the natural sciences, a botanist. He dedicated his entire life to traveling the world and studying nature, understanding it, describing it, categorizing it, and bringing that knowledge to other people. Noland knew very well what he needed to cut and what he needed to protect. That he died being called a liar was of a special irony and injustice, because no one was more committed to separating truth from lies, reality from myth, than Mont Blanc Noland. His sword cut through people's beliefs, splitting apart fact from fiction. Yet Kaugara and Noland are also perhaps the greatest example of the other recurring theme with the spear and sword wielding duos, that despite their differences, despite their rivalries, they could become great friends, the best of friends even. So must the conviction in pursuit of one's dreams and the understanding and alignment with nature's flow necessarily be in conflict with each other? Oda doesn't seem to think so, because Sun God Nika was able to wield both spear and sword at the same time, one in each hand. So let's go back to our dear martial heroes, the Wuxia. The birth of modern Wuxia starts with the May 4th movement, a turning point in the new culture movement. In 1919, just a few years prior to this, the Qing dynasty had been overthrown and replaced by a republican government, but between President and General Yuan Shikai threatening to execute opposition Senate members and declaring himself Emperor of China, the warlord era, and the rise of Chiang Kai-shek as leader of the Kuomintang and then president and dictator of China, the Republican era wasn't exactly the most progressive or freedom-loving one, and wuxia novels and film production would suffer multiple bans and crackdowns by the Republican government under accusations of corrupting morality and inciting violence, superstition, and anarchy, together with the Cantonese language film production that was equally persecuted in favor of maintaining a strictly Mandarin-based cinema. The wuxia genre found a safe haven in Hong Kong, at the time a British colony. There, spearheaded mainly by the Shaw Brothers Company, wuxia film production would continue to evolve, and eventually, through a change of focus from its more magical aspects to largely hand-to-hand kung fu combat, it would give birth to the famous Hong Kong kung fu films. These kung fu films, specifically, were a major inspiration for Dragon Ball. According to its author, Akira Toriyama, Dragon Ball is a mix of Journey to the West with a little kung fu, as he was a huge fan of Hong Kong martial art films, particularly those of Bruce Lee and Jackie Chan. Even the name itself, Dragon Ball, was inspired by Bruce Lee's most famous film, Enter the Dragon. The references to Bruce Lee in the battle manga genre are plentiful. Some are pretty obvious, but you can also see plenty in One Piece. For example, in Enter the Dragon, Lee's best friend was a guy called Roper, who was frequently running away from loan sharks to whom he owed a bunch of money due to his gambling addiction.
Come on, Roper. It's 175 big ones by Monday the 15th. Only 150. You forget interest.
You can see that in Paulie, Mr. Rope Action, similarly indebted to a bunch of loan sharks due to a gambling addiction. Likewise, the antagonist, Mr. Han, famously used Wolverine-style claws as his weapon of choice. Oh wait, that's not the right picture of our antagonist. Oh, there we go, that's better. And the most iconic depiction of Bruce Lee in the movie has him covered in wounds from Han's claws. Because of course Oda would put a reference to Bruce Lee in Luffy's mentor, Akira Toriyama did the same thing for Goku. Just look at this picture of young Master Roshi. But Oda likely wasn't looking at Bruce Lee just for some quirky movie references. You see, other than being a movie star and an extremely influential martial artist, Bruce Lee was a deeply philosophical man. According to John Little, the biographer commissioned by Bruce Lee's estate, Lee's personal library had over 1,700 heavily annotated books. His philosophy was eclectic, drawing from many sources, but primarily from Taoism, Buddhism, and philosophers Jiddu Krishnamurti and Alan Watts. According to John Little, the philosophy of Lee is more powerful than the martial arts of Lee. More importantly, Lee didn't see his martial arts as being separate from his philosophy, but rather as an extension of it. You can see how important his philosophy was to his martial arts, like in the symbol of Jeet Kune Do, the martial arts that he created, where we see both the interplay of Yin and Yang and the concept of Wu Wei, and in his martial arts books, like the Tao of Jeet Kune Do. So, for a guy like Oda, who wanted a power system in his battle manga to have a solid philosophical basis, drawing mainly from Taoism and Buddhism, and that is consistent or even an extension of the overall themes of your story, Bruce Lee would be a pretty good source of inspiration. Now, what did Bruce Lee think that martial arts was all about?
Interesting that we don't, in our world, and haven't since the days of the Greeks who did, combine philosophy and art with sport. But quite clearly, the Oriental attitude is that the three are facets of the same things.
Man, listen, you see, really, to me, ultimately, martial art means honestly expressing yourself. Now, it is very difficult to do. I mean, it is easy for me to put on a show and be cocky, and be flooded with a cocky feeling and then feel like pretty cool and all that. Or I can make all kinds of phony things, you see what I mean? Blinded by it. Or I can show you some really fancy movement. But to express oneself honestly, not lying to oneself, and to express myself honestly, that my friend, is very hard to do, and you have to train. You have to keep your reflexes so that when you want it, it's there. When you want to move, you're moving. And when you move, you are determined to move. Not taking 1 inch, not anything less than that. If I want to punch, I'm going to do it, man, and I'm going to do it, you see. So that is the type of thing you have to train yourself into it, to become one with the, you think?
Or as Rayleigh put it when explaining Haki,
疑わないこと。それが強さだ。
now notice how not only Oda tries to give unique fighting styles to every important character, but that their fighting styles are fundamentally expressions of who they are. Freedom-loving, malleable, imaginative and not afraid to be goofy, straightforward, calm, having a deep connection with even non-living things around, refusing to take a step back, or fiery, burning with passion, sometimes to very violent extents, but ultimately still seeing his ability to fight as being less important than the ability to care for others. Bruce Lee is also known for having been one of the pioneers in mixed martial arts, by doing away with the use of a specific style and borrowing from many different sources. Again, this was extremely tied to his philosophy.
You see, actually, I do not teach, karate, because I do not believe in styles anymore. I mean, I do not believe that there is such thing as like Chinese way of fighting or the Japanese way of fighting or whatever way of fighting, because unless human beings have 3 arms and 4 legs, we will have a different form of fighting. But basically, we have only 2 hands and 2 feet. So styles tends to not only separate men, because they have their own doctrines, and then the doctrine became the gospel truth, that you cannot change, But if you do not have style, if you just say, well, here I am, as a human being, how can I express myself totally and completely? Now, that way, you won't create a style, because style is a crystallization, that way, it's a process of continuing growth.
Now notice how in Lee's view, ending these separations between people was not only not counter to having people express their individuality, but a necessary aspect of it. This is also true in One Piece. Ending the separations between fishmen and humans is necessary for Koala to honestly express herself, and this is reflected in her specializing in fishman karate despite being a human. Ending the separation between the genders is necessary for Bon Clay and Ivankov to honestly express themselves, and this is reflected in their use of Okama and Newkama Kempo. Ending the separations between nations is necessary for Luffy to honestly express himself, and this is reflected by his ready integration of Wano style of Ryūō control despite being a foreigner. Ending the separation between classes is necessary for Sabo to honestly express himself, and this is reflected in his usage of the martial arts that he learned from Dragon, a revolutionary who wants to bring down the nobles, and the use of a random pipe that he found in a junkyard as his main weapon, a style that he picked up in Great Terminal, the residence of the lowest, most oppressed class among the people of Goa, despite him being born a noble. Honestly expressing yourself means to be true to your emotions, to your feelings.
To me, at least the way that when I teach it, all type of knowledge ultimately means self-knowledge. So therefore, they are coming in and ask me to teach them not so much of how to defend themselves or how to do somebody in. Rather, they want to learn to express themselves through some movement, be it anger, be it determination, or whatsoever.
Honestly expressing yourself, being true to yourself, also means to be true to your dreams. Of course, without feelings, without emotion, there is no will to do anything, and therefore there are no dreams or ambitions. There is no Haki. But at the same time, without intellect, these feelings can be nothing more than natural instinct. It's only through intellect, the ability to abstract and to imagine, to philosophize, that they can evolve into higher level aspirations. Thus Haki necessitates both the natural instinct and the unnatural intellect. These two can be, and often are, at odds with each other, like when one's emotions impair their ability to think straight, or when one denies their feelings their true nature in favor of some supposedly impartial rationality. Therefore, dreams and ambition necessitate both our natural instinct and our unnatural reasoning to be working in harmony, not submission of one in favor of the other. Similarly, if one does not understand or disregards nature and tries to accomplish their dreams by going against nature's flow, they will be met with failure. At the same time, one should not seek to understand nature to simply submit to it, disregarding their dreams in favor of helplessness. No. One should seek to understand nature and to harmonize with it, precisely so they can effectively alter its flow to make their dreams into reality. When one understands nature and pursues their goals in harmony with it, action feels effortless, and one's dreams become attainable. Similarly, when one understands their inner nature and aligns their reason in harmony with it, being truthful to who they are, being truthful to their feelings and dreams, when intellect and emotion work together towards the accomplishment of a goal, there is no inner struggle, there are no doubts, and one can freely direct all their energy to accomplish their goals. This is the meaning of ambition, and thus the source of Haki, the source of strength that transcends all in one piece. And perhaps this is the true meaning of Wu Wei.
I mean, it might sound too philosophical, but it's unacting, acting, or acting, unacting.
You've lost me.
I have, right? So what I'm saying, actually, you see, I mean, it's a combination of both. I mean, here it is the natural instinct, and here is control. You are to combine the two in harmony. Not, if you have one to the extreme, you will be very unscientific. If you have another to the extreme, you become all of a sudden a mechanical man, no longer a human being. So it is a successful combination of both. So therefore, it is not only, therefore it's not pure naturalness or unnaturalness. The ideal is unnatural naturalness or natural unnaturalness.
Yin Yang, eh?
Right, man, that's it.
Following up this video, I will be posting individual videos talking in depth about each of the 5 distinct shades of Haki. These videos are all nearly complete as of the release of this one, and so hopefully I will be posting them in this sequence you can see here, within days of each other, mostly to give everyone plenty of time to watch each one before moving on to the next. And then after they're all posted, I'll probably do a live stream, because I guess there will be plenty to talk about with you guys. As far as questions or ideas for explanations of existing powers or possible new powers in the future, things like that. Haki just tends to generate a lot of discussions, and this year probably won't be any different. Next one will be focusing specifically on that color of nature. I'll explain Diabo Jambe, I'll fully explain Seimei Kikan, finally give the answer to the secret of Kureha's youth, and of the way through which Chopper can become a doctor who can cure anything, and I'll also explain various techniques used by Zoro throughout the story. I'm terribly sorry for the delay and for leaving you guys in the dark during this time. I am in fact alive, thank you for worrying. I just got caught in a lot of personal stuff, and this Haki theory in particular just took a pretty ridiculous amount of time. Probably more effort than all my other theory videos before it combined. And because everything's so tightly connected, as my research progressed and I found out more and more stuff, a lot of stuff had to be changed and re-recorded. It was a real pain in the ass, not gonna lie. I hope the sheer length of this one, and also of the next ones for part 2 of G.U.S.T that will be coming shortly, can kind of compensate for it. I guess we're doing the Attack on Titan thing now, where it's like, final season, part 2, 3rd quarter. No, for real, this is the final season this time, trust me bro. For now, I guess you can have this short little unlisted video of G.U.S.T part 2 that you can see on the right. Other than that, that's it. Ciao.